Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Deja Thomas, and I'm a survey analyst at the Public Policy Institute of California. Welcome to our virtual program today featuring the findings of our latest PPIC statewide survey on Californians and their government. This survey was supported with funding from the RJR and Francis F. Miller Foundation, and today's event is supported with funding from the PPIC Corporate Circle and the PPIC Donor Circle. We'd like to thank them all for their support. For today's program, I will present some of the key findings from the survey and then turn to questions from the audience. If you have a question, please send it along with your name and the name of your organization to the email address on the screen, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. And as a reminder, PPIC is a public charity and does not take or support positions on any ballot measure or legislation, nor does it support or endorse or oppose any political parties or candidates for public office. And now I will move on to the presentation. Just give me a moment to share my screen. Okay. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge my co-authors on this report, which include Survey Director Mark Baldessare, Associate Survey Director Dean Bonner, and Survey Analyst Lauren Mora. I would also like to acknowledge our funders again. Without their generous support, this work would not be possible. Today's survey is part of our Californians and their government series, which has covered numerous state and national issues for over 25 years. And for those of you who may not be as familiar with the PPIC statewide survey, its mission is to provide timely, relevant, nonpartisan data on political, social, and economic opinions, which we hope will be used to help inform and improve state policymaking, raise awareness, and encourage discussion. The PPIC Californians and Their Government series covers public perceptions, attitudes, and public policy preferences. And since the start of the survey, PPIC has provided a voice for more than 400,000 Californians on more than 200 general issue-specific and regional surveys. This specific survey was conducted online from October 7th through the 14th using the Ipsos Knowledge Panel. Interviews were conducted in either English or Spanish according to respondent preferences, and our sample today includes about 1,700 California adults and around 950 who we've identified as likely voters. The margin of error is 3 for adults and 4.1 for likely voters. Getting into some survey results. With the special election about a week away, California voters will be weighing in on Proposition 50, a legislative constitutional amendment which has been titled Authorizes Temporary Changes to Congressional District Maps in Response to Texas's Partisan Redistricting. Our survey finds that 56% of likely voters in the state say they'd vote yes on Prop 50, while 43% say they would vote no. Partisans are divided on this ballot proposition, with majorities of Democrats and independents in support, and most Republicans opposing. About 9 in 10 likely voters say the outcome on the vote of Prop 50 is at least somewhat important, including 2 in 3 who say it is very important. And notably, we've not seen such a high level of importance placed on a ballot proposition since the survey began measuring this over 20 years ago. And well into the first year of Trump's second term as president, and amid a government shutdown, about a quarter of adults and 1 in 3 likely voters approve of the job he is doing as president. Approval ratings have remained low since the beginning of the year and are somewhat similar to what we saw during his first term. Today, 8 in 10 Republicans in the state approve, while about 8 in 10 or more Democrats disapprove, and most disapprove across gender, racial, ethnic, age, education, income, and regional groups. And when it comes to the way U.S. Congress is handling its job, overwhelming majorities of adults and likely voters disapprove. The share disapproving has remained low over the course of the year, though it is notable that it has declined from around this time last year, in October 2024, to reach a record low among all adults. And today, most across partisan groups disapprove. Um, really quickly, we also asked about Senators Alex Padilla and Adam Schiff. Opinions on Padilla are divided, with about half of adults saying they approve and half saying they disapprove. However, a majority of likely voters do express approval. Meanwhile, approval of Schiff sits at about 4 in 10, with likely voters divided on this issue. Next, moving on to Californians' views of the US more broadly, adults in the state most often chose political extremism or threats to democracy as the most important issue facing the country, with 4 in 10 saying this. This is followed by 2 in 10 who say it is jobs or the economy, and about 1 in 10 who say it is immigration. Half of likely voters say the most important issue in the US is threats to democracy, and among partisans, Democrats and independents were most likely to say threats to democracy, while Republicans are most likely to say the top issue is immigration. And when it comes to the direction of the US, about 3 in 4 adults and likely voters say the country is headed in the wrong direction, and this share has hit a high point among adults. Today, most across partisan, demographic, and regional groups say this, with the exception of Republicans, where a solid majority say the country is headed in the right direction. Turning to economic conditions, about 3 in 4 adults and likely voters describe the nation's economy as not so good or poor. Over 7 in 10 across partisan, demographic, and regional groups say this, with an exception among Republicans, where this share is nearly half. And the share saying it is not so good or poor increases with rising income. We also asked about the economic outlook for the country, and most Californians hold pessimistic views, kind of mirroring the previous question, with 3 in 4 adults who say they expect bad times over the next year, and about 1 in 5 who expect good times ahead. Turning to state issues, a majority of adults and likely voters approve of the way that Governor Newsom is handling his job, and this share has fluctuated over the course of the year. Most Democrats and independents approve, while most Republicans disapprove. Half or more across demographic and regional groups approve of the governor, with exceptions among Californians who are white or reside in the Central Valley. And when it comes to the state legislature, about half of adults and a slim majority of likely voters approve. The share of adults who approve has sat below half since September 2023. And today, um, most Democrats approve, while majorities of independents and Republicans disapprove. Okay, on to the state's economy. About half of adults say the state is in a recession, including about 1 in 6 who say it is a serious one. That said, there has been a decline in the overall share since the last time we asked this question in June 2023. Our survey today finds that Californians who are Republican or who have incomes under $40,000 a year are among the most likely to say that the state is in a serious recession. Next, 4 in 10 Californians say they are concerned about not having enough money to pay for their rent or mortgage. A majority of Central Valley residents say that they are at least somewhat concerned about this, compared to about half or fewer in other regions of the state. We also found that renters are twice as likely as homeowners to express this concern, and even more so, 3 in 10 renters say they are very concerned compared to about 1 in 10 homeowners. We also had some questions about the issue of homelessness in this month's survey, finding that 78% of adults say that they are very or somewhat concerned about the presence of homeless people in their local communities. And the share saying they are very concerned has declined steadily and significantly since November 2019. Today, overwhelming majorities across the state's regions are concerned, um, with shares highest in Central Valley and Los Angeles and lowest in the San Francisco Bay Area. We also had a couple more questions on this topic. We asked about whether the presence of homeless people has changed in respondents' communities. Today, Californians are split on whether or not the presence of homeless people has changed, with about half saying it has increased and a plurality saying it has stayed the same over the last year. Very few say it has decreased. We've also asked how often respondents see someone experiencing homelessness, and more than 7 in 10 say they see someone experiencing homelessness at least every few days. And this includes 53% who say they see someone experiencing homelessness daily. Um, that uh, those are pretty much the key findings, but our survey covered other topics as well, and some of them are listed here. I would encourage everyone to take a look at the survey report available on our website. For those of you who'd like to take a closer look, I highly recommend taking a look at the time trends and crosstabs on our website to see shifts in opinion over time, as well as breakdowns of responses by party, demographic groups, and regions. And that concludes the presentation, but I would first like to remind everyone in the audience to please submit your questions at ppiceventquestions@gmail.com and to please include your name and the name of your organization that you are with. I will stop sharing. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and answer questions from the audience. It looks like we have our first question. The survey shows that a majority of Californians support Proposition 50. What does the survey suggest about support or opposition in competitive districts? Yeah, that's a great question. So our survey, I want to note that this question is among likely voters. So, that's just an important detail, but our survey also defines competitive districts based on the Cook Political Report, and this particular survey includes roughly 200 likely voters who live in competitive districts by this definition. But getting back to the question, support for Proposition 50 still reaches a majority among these likely voters in competitive districts, with 54% saying they would vote yes if the election were held today, and 44% who say no. So while we do have to take the margin of error into consideration, I'd say that the views aren't very different compared to likely voters overall in our survey. Okay, we have a second question here. Um, have perceptions of top issues facing the country changed over the past year? Hmm. Um, First of all, great question. Californians' views of the most important issue facing the US hasn't really changed much over the course of this year. Um, the top three have remained the same over the course of 2025 so far, with threats to democracy at the top, then economy, and then immigration. And even the order has stayed the same. That said, it is interesting that the share of Californians saying the top issue is political extremism or threats to democracy has increased over the course of the year from about 1 in 3 in February, 35% in June, and to 4 in 10 today. So as we continue to ask this question, because it is one of our main tracking questions, it should be interesting to see if things continue to creep up or if they change in any other way. And I have another question from the audience. How do Californians' views of federal immigration policy and actions by the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE, compare to their views on immigrants and immigration levels? Um, Yeah, we did ask a handful of questions on this topic, and some of them are new questions. So I think I'll try to answer this question by walking us through a bunch of them. So, to start unpacking this topic area, we have a question about immigration in the US in general. Our survey finds that 2 in 3 adults and likely voters say that on the whole, immigration is a good thing for the country. About 9 in 10 Californians say that immigrants are a benefit for their contribution to economic growth in the US, including 7 in 10 who say it is a major benefit. And when it comes to immigration levels, half say that it should be kept at its present levels, 2 in 10 say it should be increased, and about 3 in 10 say that it should be decreased. Um, When it comes to opinions on how to handle undocumented immigrants, 7 in 10 or more adults and likely voters say that there should be a way for them to stay in the country legally if certain requirements are met. And 6 in 10 adults and likely voters favor state and local governments making their own policies and taking actions separate from the federal government to protect the legal rights of undocumented immigrants in California. Also, about 7 in 10 or more adults and likely voters in the state say immigrants are a benefit to California, and majorities have said this since the year 2000. So, with most Californians holding positive sentiments about immigrants and immigration, and combining some this with oh, sorry about that. Combining this with what some people are experiencing in their neighborhoods and what, people might be seeing on the news and in the media about ICE's actions in the state and across the country, as well as protests in reaction to all of this, it maybe isn't super surprising that 7 in 10 adults and 65% of likely voters in California say that they disapprove of the job that ICE is doing. 2 in 3 or more across demographic and regional groups disapprove, with partisans divided on this issue. Um, I know that this is taking me really long to answer, but I also want to mention that we also asked respondents whether they worry that they or someone they know could be deported, finding that half of Californians say they worry a lot or some, including 45% of US-born Californians and 47% of naturalized Californians who say this, which I think kind of speaks to the heightened anxieties felt by communities, regardless of citizenship status, on this particular issue. Okay, so hopefully that answered your question. Um, we do have another question. Most Californians seem to be satisfied with their financial situation, but does this survey reveal any differences based on income or in certain areas of California? What about job security and the cost of living? Are Californians in some areas more worried than those in other areas? Yeah, thank you for this question because we didn't quite get to talk about that today. But most Californians in today's survey say that they are at least somewhat satisfied with their household's financial situation, and about a quarter say that they are not satisfied. And when it comes to job security, over 3 in 10 adults say that they are at least somewhat concerned that they themselves or a family member will lose their job in the next year. So for both of these questions, And also for our question asking about concern over paying for rent or mortgage, Californians who are earning under $40,000, have lower education levels, are younger, or who are Latino or African American are among the most likely to say that they are um, concerned about losing their job and worried about affording their rent. When it comes to regional differences, um, about 6 in 10 or more across regions are worried about losing their job, and this share is somewhat higher in the Inland Empire compared to other regions. Oh, looks like we have another question from Hannah Uller at NM Law. I apologize if I said that incorrectly. How representative is the survey sample across geographic areas, age, income, race, citizenship status, etc.? How does the sample compare to the state population? Um, thank you for your question. Yeah, so in general, in our survey, we try to have at minimum 100 respondents in the sample for any given subgroup. So that includes citizenship status, different racial ethnic groups, different income groups, different regional areas. I'd say we do our best weighting the sample to the state population. We use the ACS to kind of weight our population or weight our survey to the population. And there's a kind of a lot of details. So I kind of encourage you to look at the report on our website. There's a whole methodology that you can take a look at. And also feel free to reach out to me or to others on the survey team, and we'll definitely provide more detail if you're interested. Okay, I have another question. Was there anything that surprised you in the latest survey? Yeah, I actually think there was a lot that surprised me in this survey, especially with it being a election survey, or at least it ended up that way. So while the Proposition 50 findings are very timely and important and interesting in their own right, I found that the questions we asked about trust in government were particularly surprising. And again, I didn't get to talk about this in the presentation, but it is also in the report. In particular, it was the shift among the share saying that the state government is run by a few big interests. Um, Today, 2 in 3 California adults say this, and this share was about 8 in 10 back in June. That's the largest decline from a month-to-month basis that we've seen for that particular question, and it stuck out to me that this share has declined this much. I also wonder what that means for Californians, especially as we head into an election year after this vote on Prop 50. So yeah, that was kind of my most important or most surprising finding in the survey. Um, okay, so now that we've reached the end of our program, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I'd also like to thank our funders from the survey one more time, the RJR and Francis F. Miller Foundation. Um, we would appreciate if you could take a moment to give us your feedback on this event. If you pre-registered for today's event, you'll receive an email later today with a link to a short survey. However, you can also scan the QR code on your screen right now. And finally, a recording of today's event will be made available soon on the PPIC website and on our YouTube channel, so that if you'd like, you can watch it again or share it with your network. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful afternoon.